This officer thought it was just another morning on patrol, until a tiny, trembling puppy came running toward him, crying. But when he looked closer at the puppy's collar, his face went pale. Something was terribly wrong. You think you've seen it all until a puppy with fear in its eyes changes everything. This isn't just a sad rescue story. This one unravels a dark mystery, and it all starts with a puppy and a collar that shouldn't even exist. The sky still wore the soft blush of dawn. Pale streaks of pink cut through the horizon, painting the sleepy suburban neighborhood in a watercolor haze. The sidewalks were empty. Sprinklers ticked and hissed in the distance, spraying tiny rainbows into the fresh morning light. Officer Daniel Hale had driven these streets 100 times before, each patrol blurring into the next like clockwork. A coffee in one hand, radio chatter in the background, engine humming beneath him. This was his calm before the city stirred. It was supposed to be just another uneventful shift. The kind of shift where nothing happened except a few traffic violations and the occasional barking dog complaint. But this morning felt different. There was a stillness that wasn't just quiet, it was hollow. The kind that made the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stiffen without explanation. He couldn't quite put his finger on it. A gut feeling. Years on the force had taught him not to ignore that. He slowly sipped from his thermos, parked along Maplewood Avenue, engine idling, houses lined up in perfect symmetry, white fences, manicured lawns, porch lights still glowing from the night before. Everything looked peaceful, normal, ordinary, and then it happened. A flicker of motion darted across his peripheral vision. He turned his head quickly, expecting maybe a jogger or a kid chasing a soccer ball that had rolled into the street. But no, it wasn't either of those things. It was low to the ground, small, and fast. At first, it looked like a crumpled brown paper bag tumbling across the pavement, or maybe a squirrel darting across a lawn. But Daniel blinked, focused, his brow furrowed. It wasn't a bag, and it wasn't a squirrel. It was a puppy, tiny, filthy, covered in mud, and trembling so violently that it stumbled every few feet as it ran. Its ears were pinned back, and its tail was tucked so tight beneath it that it might as well have disappeared. Its ribs showed through its thin, matted coat. Every breath it took looked painful, shallow, desperate. And it wasn't just running, it was bolting, right toward him. Daniel felt a jolt of confusion. This wasn't normal. He stepped out of his car slowly, cautiously, every police instinct in him turning on like a switch. Something wasn't right. Animals, especially scared ones, didn't run toward people. They didn't cry out for help. But this puppy was crying, not barking, not whining out of playfulness, crying, a sound so raw and piercing. It sliced through the quiet morning air like a siren, high-pitched, desperate, pained. Daniel dropped to one knee, his hand outstretched. The puppy didn't hesitate. It flung itself into his arms, like it had been running for miles, just to find him. And as soon as it hit his chest, it collapsed, limp, shivering, breathless. Its heart thudded so rapidly against Daniel's uniform that he could feel it pounding through the fabric. He looked around instinctively, scanning the neighborhood. No open gates, no frantic owner, no children calling for a lost pet, just silence. He held the puppy closer, feeling the mud soaking into his uniform sleeve. His other hand gently stroked its back, trying to calm the trembling. Then, Daniel's eyes landed on the collar. At first glance, it was nothing special, just old leather, stained and cracked with age, probably handmade. But there was a metal tag dangling from it, dull and scratched. He squinted, and then his entire body went cold. There were no engravings of a name, no phone number, no address, just one word: run. Daniel didn't move. He couldn't. The word stared back at him, carved deep into the metal, not etched neatly like a pet store engraving, but scratched in violently, almost angrily. The letters were uneven, sharp, as if someone had carved it in a hurry, maybe in fear. He turned the tag over, checking for anything else. Nothing, just that one word. For letters, each one whispered something darker the longer he stared. Run. It wasn't a name. It wasn't a command. It was a warning. Daniel's pulse spiked. Something about it chilled him deeper than the morning breeze ever could. It wasn't just the word. It was the way it was written, as if the person who did it didn't have time for anything more. As if run was all they could manage before. Before what? He stood up, holding the puppy tighter. It whimpered and nuzzled into his chest, eyes closed, utterly drained. He looked around the street again. Still no movement, no missing pet flyers, no barking from nearby homes. And the puppy's condition? It didn't scream lost pet. This was neglect, survival, trauma. Its paws were raw, bleeding in some spots. There were scratches along its belly and sides, like it had been running through thorn bushes, and under its fur, he could feel the sharp bones of malnutrition. The poor thing hadn't eaten properly in days. Daniel reached for his radio, but paused. He wasn't even sure what to report yet. Discovered stray animal didn't feel right. This wasn't just a case of a dog escaping a backyard. This puppy wasn't just lost. It was fleeing. The difference hit Daniel hard. He carried the puppy to the patrol car, gently setting it on the passenger seat and wrapping it in his jacket. The little dog didn't resist. It curled up instantly, trembling less now, almost like it knew it was finally safe. But Daniel's mind was racing. Run. Who sends out a puppy with that word around its neck? Who lets it out in this condition, hoping it would make it to someone? What had it seen? And what was it running from? He couldn't shake the feeling that he'd just stepped into something far bigger than a lost pet case. Something deeper, more sinister. A silent scream carved into metal. Daniel turned on the engine and looked at the rearview mirror. Still nothing. Just the stillness of suburbia behind him. But that was the thing about quiet neighborhoods. They were perfect places to hide secrets. And this puppy? This puppy just dragged one out of the shadows. He didn't know it yet, but this moment, this tiny, trembling animal in his passenger seat was about to unravel a mystery that had gone unnoticed for far too long. A mystery with missing people, a hidden trail, and a message that had taken the form of a single word: run. And that word was only the beginning. The drive to the station felt unusually long, even though it was only a few blocks away. Every street Daniel turned on to look the same, quiet, calm, almost eerily so. He glanced at the puppy every few seconds, watching it breathe, shallow and fast, like it didn't quite believe it was safe yet, like it was still running, even in sleep. Daniel didn't turn on the radio. He didn't call it in. Something in his gut told him not to. Not yet. He needed to think. And if there was one thing he trusted more than his training, it was his instinct. He pulled into the back of the precinct instead of the front. Less eyes, less questions. He carried the puppy in through the side entrance, wrapped in his jacket like a newborn. A few officers nodded at him, thinking maybe he'd rescued it from traffic or picked it up off someone's porch. Nothing suspicious, but Daniel wasn't taking it to the kennels. He took it to his office. He locked the door, and for the next 10 minutes, he sat there, watching it, listening to its tiny breaths. His mind retraced every step of the morning, every oddity, every blink of confusion. And then he opened his laptop. He started digging. First, missing dog reports. Nothing matched. Then he expanded the search. Missing persons, nearby towns, keywords: run, dog, animal, note, escape. Nothing. At first. Then a blip. A small, local forum in a neighboring county. The post was only a few days old. Not viral. Not even shared publicly. Just a single post by someone with a burner account. It read, "If anyone finds a brown puppy near the state line, please don't ignore it. Check the collar. That's all I can say. Just check the collar. And don't ask questions. Just run." Daniel sat back in his chair. His mouth went dry. He read it again. Twice. 3 times. It wasn't just coincidence. It couldn't be. The collar. The word. The warning. This was intentional. He looked back at the puppy, now half awake and watching him with watery eyes. The trust it had shown, the way it had collapsed into his arms, wasn't just relief. It was hope, like it had been told to find someone. And maybe, somehow, it had found exactly who it needed. But why him? Why now? He scrolled further into the forum. Nothing more from that account. No replies. No contact. The user had deleted their profile shortly after posting. This wasn't just someone who lost a dog. This was someone trying to send a message. Daniel leaned forward. His hands hovered over the keyboard, unsure what to search next. Should he contact the local shelter? Anonymous tip lines? Animal control? But his instinct screamed one word. No, not yet. Because if someone wanted this message to reach a specific person, going public might spook them. Or worse, put someone else in danger. He had to be careful. He pulled the tag from his desk drawer and examined it again. This time with a magnifier. The scratch marks were erratic, but beneath them, under the jagged lines, something else shimmered faintly, almost like another layer, another word. He turned on his desk lamp and angled it just right, and there it was, barely visible. Another word, hidden under the word run, as if it had been carved first, then scratched out. It said, help. His breath caught. This wasn't just a one-word message. It was a timeline. Whoever had carved that tag had changed their mind, or something had changed it for them. They tried to ask for help first, but later they knew. They knew help wasn't coming, so they left one final command. Run. Daniel stood abruptly. He locked the tag away, grabbed the puppy, and headed for the evidence room, because whatever this was, it wasn't over. In fact, it was just beginning. Daniel's mind was a blur as he carried the puppy back to his patrol car, its tiny frame shivering uncontrollably in his arms. It felt like holding a bundle of fear wrapped in fur, eyes wide, breath shallow, completely overwhelmed. As Daniel settled the pup in the front seat and gently wrapped it in his patrol jacket, something shifted inside him. This wasn't just another day. This wasn't just another stray. The puppy's collar haunted him. That single word, run, replayed in his mind like a warning bell. The tag was crude, roughly cut, and yet deliberate, as though someone had carved it out in a desperate moment. A moment of fear, a last attempt to send a message. Daniel pulled out his phone and took a photo of the tag. He uploaded it to the department's database to cross-reference with any animal-related cases, lost pet reports, or unusual notes logged by other officers. The system would take a while to search. In the meantime, he gave the puppy a drink of water from his thermos lid and rummaged in the glove box for the treats his wife always insisted he carry. The little guy sniffed them hesitantly, then gobbled them down like he hadn't eaten in days. Still, that word on the tag wouldn't leave Daniel's mind. He reached over to the dashboard mic. Dispatch. This is Officer 2345. I found a stray puppy with suspicious markings on its collar. I'm headed to Southside Shelter to get him scanned and checked out. Copy that. 2345. Proceed with caution. The drive to the shelter wasn't long, but every red light felt eternal. Daniel kept one eye on the road, the other flicking over to the pup now curled in his jacket, eyes half closed, but not asleep, not safe enough to sleep. When he arrived at Southside Shelter, he was greeted by the usual bustle of volunteers and barking. But as he walked in with the puppy, the noise seemed to hush. One of the younger staff members, Claire, approached him with a warm smile that faded the second she saw the collar. Daniel explained the situation. Claire gently took the pup and examined the tag, her face drained of color. I've seen this before, she whispered. Daniel narrowed his eyes. What do you mean? Claire disappeared into a back room and returned with an old, faded manila file. She laid it on the table. Inside was a photo, grainy, but clear enough. A different puppy, same look of fear, same type of collar, same word carved into the tag, run. She pointed to a note paper-clipped to the photo. 3 years ago, we found this pup tied up near an old cabin. A hiker had reported constant barking echoing through the forest. When they investigated, they found the dog barely alive. No food, no water, no shelter. Next to it, a note, they're watching. Daniel felt a cold shiver run down his spine. We never figured out who left the dog or the note. We tried tracing the tag, but it wasn't registered. Eventually, the pup recovered and was adopted. We closed the case. Daniel sat back in the chair, silent for a beat. Do you still have the contact for the adopter? Claire nodded. She moved out of state last year, but I can get the number. Daniel thanked her, then stepped outside to clear his head. He stood near the parking lot, looking out at the woods that bordered the shelter. They suddenly seemed more menacing, like they held secrets they weren't ready to share. He dialed the station and requested access to missing persons files related to the forest areas, especially those involving people known to work with or care for animals. As he waited on the other end, he glanced at the puppy through the glass of the shelter's intake room. The pup wasn't just traumatized. It looked like it had seen something it wasn't supposed to. The call came through. A familiar voice on the other end. Detective Ramirez. You're digging into the forest disappearances, huh? I think there's a connection. You're not the first to say that, but we never had anything solid. Just whispers. I might now, Daniel replied. Over the next few hours, Daniel pieced together a disturbing pattern. 3 years ago, a veterinary assistant named Melanie vanished while walking her dogs along a rarely used trail. 2 years ago, Theo, an animal rescuer who ran an unofficial shelter from his home, never returned from a supply run near the same forest. Then a year ago, an elderly couple known for feeding strays disappeared without a trace. Each case was closed due to lack of evidence. No bodies, no signs of struggle, just gone. And now another puppy. Same collar, same word, same warning. The forest wasn't just hiding animals, it was swallowing people. And Daniel was beginning to suspect that the person, or people, behind it all were using the dogs as messengers, as bait, as living warnings, or maybe even survivors. He looked at Brave, the name already forming in his mind before it escaped his lips. The puppy turned and met his eyes, as if it knew what Daniel was thinking. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. Daniel had to act fast. Every instinct he had as a lawman told him that this case was bigger than it appeared. It wasn't just a random stray puppy that had wandered into his path. The more he thought about it, the more everything felt connected. Like a jigsaw puzzle, he was slowly starting to piece together. He couldn't shake the feeling that the run tag wasn't just some coincidence. And with every passing hour, that feeling intensified. The puppy, now named Brave by Daniel, was no longer just a victim of circumstance. It was the key to unlocking something far darker. The small dog had begun to calm down a little, but it still kept close to Daniel, its tiny body trembling against his leg. They were back at the station now, but Daniel could barely concentrate. He kept glancing at the collar, at that single word etched into the metal. Run. He had to know what it meant. Why was this puppy carrying such a message? And why was it looking to Daniel for help? When he finally got the courage to dig deeper, it became clear he couldn't do it alone. That morning, something was different about him. It wasn't just the exhaustion weighing down his shoulders, or the growing mystery eating away at him. It was the realization that this puppy had more courage than most humans ever would. Brave wasn't just a dog. It was a messenger, sent into the world to bring attention to a much darker secret. Daniel's thoughts raced as he realized the case wasn't about the puppy at all. It was about something bigger, something hiding in plain sight. Every clue led him to one conclusion. Someone had been systematically targeting animal lovers, using these puppies as silent witnesses to their twisted acts. The thought made his skin crawl. He spent the next 2 days working nonstop, diving into old case files and unsolved disappearances. Every new lead only made things worse, the connections growing eerily close to one another. Each missing person had been connected to animal welfare in some way, whether they were volunteers, pet rescuers, or veterinarians. What started as a string of isolated incidents had now evolved into something disturbingly organized. Then Daniel found it, the breaking point. He came across an old, dusty report from the last known disappearance. A woman named Melanie, who had vanished while walking her dogs on a trail in the same forest that now haunted him. The report mentioned a strange note found near the scene, something that hadn't made sense at the time. It's happening again. The words on the page echoed in his mind, but they didn't stop there. It was a note, scribbled hastily, found alongside a puppy's collar. The note read, "They're watching." The chilling realization hit him like a ton of bricks. The run collars, the missing people, and the cryptic messages, they were all part of some sick, twisted pattern. And the puppy, it wasn't just trying to survive, it was trying to lead someone to the truth. That was the moment Daniel knew he had to go back to the forest. The clock was ticking, and the deeper he dug, the more dangerous it became. But there was no going back now. He couldn't turn his back on this little puppy and its silent plea for help. Daniel couldn't sleep that night. The weight of the case pressed down on him like a heavy cloak. Every time he closed his eyes, he saw the puppy's frightened face, the word "run" etched into the collar, the faint cries of something far more sinister lurking just beneath the surface. He paced his apartment, the eerie silence broken only by the occasional rustle of the puppy shifting on his bed. By dawn, Daniel knew what he had to do. He had no answers, but his gut told him that the forest, the same one where multiple people had vanished without a trace, held the key to everything. He couldn't ignore the patterns anymore. Those cryptic messages, the missing animal lovers, the puppy's strange and inexplicable behavior, it all pointed to one thing. Something had been brewing in that dense, ominous forest for far too long. He grabbed his gear, strapped Brave, the small, trembling puppy, into the car, and drove without a second thought. The urgency of the moment was clear. As they drove out of the city and into the heart of the woods, the sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch and whisper secrets of their own. The air grew colder, and the trees began to thicken, their branches intertwining like the claws of some unseen creature. Daniel gripped the steering wheel tightly, his mind spinning with the connections he had made. The puppy was more than just an innocent bystander. It was a piece of a much larger puzzle, and it was now leading him into the heart of the storm. As they parked near the edge of the forest, the puppy suddenly became agitated, whining and pulling at the leash. It was as though it knew exactly where it was going, where its journey would end. Daniel hesitated, but then gathered his courage. He had no choice but to follow the path that Brave was leading him down. They hiked into the woods in near silence. The only sound was the crunch of leaves underfoot and Brave's faint whimpering. It was odd, though. There was an eerie stillness that hung over the forest, like something was waiting, watching them. Every now and then, Daniel would glance down at the puppy. Brave had stopped looking scared. Now it was more determined, focused. Every step seemed calculated, like it had been here before. After nearly an hour of walking deeper into the forest, the puppy suddenly stopped. Its ears perked up, and it sniffed the air. Then, without warning, it darted off into the trees. Daniel hesitated, then followed quickly, his heart pounding. He had no idea what to expect, but the urgency in the puppy's movements told him this was it, the moment he had been waiting for. And then they found it, the shack, hidden behind overgrown foliage, its crumbling exterior barely visible beneath the canopy of trees. It was abandoned, decaying, but something about it sent a chill down Daniel's spine. It was too perfect, too concealed, as if it had been waiting, just waiting, for someone to find it. Brave stopped in front of the shack, its tail tucked low, its body tense. Daniel's flashlight beam cut through the darkness, revealing the shack's eerie interior. The door was old, warped from years of neglect, but it was slightly ajar. Daniel pushed it open slowly, his instincts telling him to be cautious. His gun was ready in his holster, but his mind was already racing. What was he about to discover? Inside was a nightmare. The shack was far more than just an abandoned building. It was a graveyard of memories, of suffering. There were cages, old, rusted ones, stacked in corners, torn blankets scattered across the floor, evidence of animals that had been trapped, abandoned, and possibly worse. The smell hit him like a wall. It was a mixture of decay, mold, and something far more unsettling, the lingering scent of fear. His eyes scanned the room, landing on the walls. The wood was carved with strange, jagged markings, almost as if someone had tried to scratch messages into the walls, messages that had been left behind in desperation. There's no way out. They trust us. We failed them. Daniel recoiled. The words burned into his mind. He felt the weight of them settle into his chest, like a burden he couldn't carry. But it wasn't just the words. It was the realization that these weren't just random markings. This was a person, or a group of people, who had been here before. People who had lived in this place, and continued their dark work, leaving clues behind for anyone brave enough to find them. And then, something caught his eye, something that made his blood run cold. In the corner of the shack, nestled beneath the rusted cages, was a small box, a metal box, its edges worn and weathered with time. Daniel approached it cautiously, his heart hammering in his chest. Inside the box were more collars, dozens of them, all marked with the same chilling word, run. His hands trembled as he picked one up. It was identical to the collar that Brave wore. He felt sick, the weight of what he was holding suddenly unbearable. These weren't just collars. They were messages, warnings, and somehow these puppies, these poor, innocent creatures, had been caught in the middle of something far bigger than anyone could have imagined. Daniel couldn't breathe. He looked down at Brave, who was sitting beside him, still shaking but now staring intently at the box. The puppy seemed to know the truth, its eyes filled with understanding that Daniel could only begin to fathom. His mind raced as he pieced the fragments of the puzzle together. The missing people, the disappearances, all linked to this shack, to this twisted game. Animal lovers, activists, rescuers, they had all been targeted. And this shack, this vile place, was where it had all begun. But who was behind it? Who had done this? Before Daniel could piece it together further, his radio crackled to life, pulling him from his thoughts. It was backup, finally arriving at the scene. But what they uncovered in the back room of the shack made even the most seasoned officer shudder. There was a camera, old and dusty, still functioning, and on its screen were images, grainy, disturbing footage of the missing people. Each one had been filmed, trapped in cages, their faces filled with terror. The realization hit him hard. The person, or people, responsible had been using the puppies as bait, as messengers. They had been watching, always watching, and now, Daniel was staring at the evidence. The twisted truth had been uncovered, and it was far more terrifying than he had ever imagined. As the team began their investigation, Daniel sat in silence, Brave at his side. The puppy had led him here, to the heart of the darkness, and had been the catalyst for exposing the twisted truth that had remained hidden for so long. But the story didn't end there. Daniel's pulse quickened as the realization settled in. This was no longer just about missing puppy. It was about everything that had been hidden beneath the surface of the town, the secret, the dark truth that no one had dared to uncover. The puppy, Brave, was more than just an innocent animal. It was a victim, a messenger, and its quiet cries had led Daniel to a web of horror so intricate, so deeply embedded in the town's past, that he could hardly breathe. He could hear the radio crackling in the distance, officers beginning to file in, but none of them could have prepared for what they were about to uncover. The shack, once a decaying relic of forgotten time, now stood as a terrifying monument to cruelty. Daniel turned his attention back to the metal box, the collars piled inside. His hand shook as he dug deeper, pulling out more of the tags. Each one had the same message, run, and each collar was from a different time, different seasons, different years, but all with that same twisted symbol, that word carved into the metal like a warning no one had taken seriously until now. His mind raced, each horrifying piece of the puzzle falling into place. But then a chill ran down his spine. He wasn't alone. There was someone else in the shack. At first, Daniel thought it was just the eerie atmosphere, his nerves playing tricks on him. But then he heard it, soft, barely audible, but unmistakable, the sound of breathing, low, deliberate breaths, almost as if it were waiting for him to realize it. The hairs on the back of his neck stood on end. Slowly, he turned, his flashlight slicing through the darkness. And there, standing in the far corner of the room, was a figure, tall, cloaked in shadows, barely visible except for the faint outline of a face. The figure didn't move, but the presence was suffocating, pressing down on Daniel like a heavy weight. His heart hammered in his chest as he instinctively reached for his gun. His fingers brushed the cold steel of the holster, but before he could pull it free, the figure spoke, its voice low and rasping, filled with a coldness that made Daniel's blood run cold. "You shouldn't have come here," the voice said, each word dripping with menace. Daniel froze, every muscle in his body tensed, and for a moment, time seemed to stretch. The figure didn't take a step forward. It didn't need to. It was as though it was already in Daniel's mind, reading his every thought, anticipating his every move. The puppy beside him whined, a soft, desperate sound that filled the silence. Daniel looked down at Brave, who was trembling once again. The little dog's eyes were wide, its body stiff with fear, but there was something else, something deeper, a flicker of recognition. It was as though Brave knew this figure, knew this place, and knew that something much worse was coming. Daniel took a slow step back, his mind racing. This was it, the confrontation he had been avoiding, the one he hadn't been prepared for. The mystery was unraveling too fast, too violently. The weight of the situation, the realization that the lives of innocent people had been trapped in this nightmare, hit him hard. And now the man, or whatever he was, standing before him, was about to reveal something far worse than he could have ever anticipated. "You think you can stop this?" the figure asked, a smirk twisting its lips, though its face remained obscured. "You're just a cop. This is bigger than you, bigger than any of them." A chill crept down Daniel's spine. He had a sickening feeling that he was about to learn something that would shatter everything he thought he knew, something that could change the course of everything. "I won't let you hurt anyone else," Daniel said, his voice low but firm. The figure's laughter echoed through the shack, hollow and twisted. "Hurt? No, we don't hurt. We save them." Daniel's eyes narrowed. He didn't understand. Save them? Who was this person? What twisted version of the truth was he trying to sell? The figure stepped closer, the shadows seeming to part as it emerged from the darkness. Now, Daniel could make out more details. A gaunt face, pale eyes that seemed to glimmer with something unearthly, and a presence that felt wrong, unnatural. And then the figure did something that made Daniel's stomach drop. It reached down and picked up another collar from the pile. It held it up, the word run gleaming in the flashlight's beam. "This is their salvation," the figure said, voice soft, almost soothing. "You see, they choose to run. They understand. They are the only ones who see the truth. They understand why they must run." Before Daniel could respond, the figure turned its back to him and slowly began to walk toward the back of the shack. "Don't," Daniel warned, his voice rising in urgency. "Don't go back there." But the figure didn't listen. It continued to walk, a deliberate pace, almost as though it was daring Daniel to follow. And then, before Daniel could even move, the room plunged into darkness. The flashlight flickered and died, the beam cutting off mid-sentence. In the oppressive blackness, Daniel heard the faintest sound, the rustle of movement, the scraping of metal on wood. It wasn't just the figure anymore. There were more. He could feel it. He could hear them. The walls seemed to close in, the air heavy with something sinister, something unnatural. Then, as if from nowhere, the sound of a dog's bark pierced the silence. A single, sharp cry of desperation. It was Brave. The puppy's terrified yelps echoed in the room, filling Daniel with dread. He lunged forward, his hand outstretched, but it was too late. The figure turned, its pale face now illuminated in the flash of a distant, dying light. It was smiling now, an unsettling grin that stretched too wide. "Too late," it whispered, and then, in the blink of an eye, the shack was silent again, save for the distant howls of the lost souls and the scratching of metal on wood. The eerie truth of the place closed around Daniel, and everything that had led him here finally made sense. This was only the beginning. The air in the shack was thick, suffocating, and filled with the echoes of everything Daniel had just witnessed. Every step, every moment had led him here, to this moment of horrifying clarity. But even in the face of this unexplainable, terrifying truth, he couldn't help but wonder, had he truly uncovered it all? Or had this only been a glimpse into something far darker? He stood in the silence, his mind racing with questions he didn't have answers to. The shack was empty now, save for the disheveled collars and the faint echoes of the lost souls who had once wandered in search of salvation. The figure, the one that had called itself a savior, was gone, but the truth lingered, hanging heavily in the air like the scent of something rotten. The idea that these animals weren't just running from something, they were running toward something. Daniel's chest tightened as he realized the chilling reality of what he had stumbled upon. This wasn't just a case of animal cruelty. It was something far more sinister. It was a system, a machine built to feed on the helplessness and desperation of both animals and people alike. These animals weren't lost or abandoned. They were being chosen to be part of something far darker, something far more dangerous. For a brief moment, Daniel felt the weight of it all, the lives that had been ruined, the families torn apart, the children who had lost their pets to the darkness that hid just beneath the surface of their quiet, suburban town. And it wasn't just the animals that had been victimized. It was the people, too. The figures in the shadows were pulling strings, orchestrating this twisted cycle of fear, manipulation, and false salvation. Daniel thought back to the moment he first found Brave, the trembling puppy with that chilling, unmistakable collar. Run! It had felt like a warning, but now he understood. It was a plea. The animals knew something that humans couldn't see. They were running for their lives, but also running from something worse than they could comprehend. But why? Why this town? Why those specific animals? The pieces of the puzzle had begun to fit, but just as quickly, they slipped through his fingers. He thought back to the shack, to the collars, to the pile of metal tags etched with that same word. Run. What had it all meant? Who was behind it all? He felt as if he was standing on the precipice of something even darker. But no matter how hard he tried, he couldn't get a clear picture. The figure had spoken of salvation, of a system that had been in place for years. But what was it? Was this truly the end? Or was there more that lay in wait? The town was quiet now, too quiet. The world beyond the shack was still spinning, unaware of the darkness that had taken root in the heart of their community. Daniel turned toward the exit, the sound of his footsteps muffled by the heavy silence that weighed on him. As he stepped outside, the first rays of dawn were creeping across the horizon, painting the sky in soft hues of pink and gold. The birds were still singing, and the quiet suburban street stretched out before him like a serene, peaceful scene. Yet it was a lie, a facade that hid the ugly truth beneath. Daniel's hand instinctively went to his pocket, his fingers brushing the cold edge of his phone. The pictures he had taken of the shack, the collars, the word run carved into the metal. They were all still fresh in his mind. He needed to share what he had found, needed to warn others. But even as the thought crossed his mind, he hesitated. What if it was too much? What if they wouldn't believe him? The fear that had haunted him throughout this investigation was now taking root in his own heart. What if no one believed that the town, this seemingly peaceful place, had harbored something so monstrous? The sense of unease swelled in his chest, threatening to overtake him. The investigation had led him here, to this moment of understanding, but it had also left him with more questions than answers. The answers he had uncovered were only fragments of a much larger story, one that stretched far beyond the town, beyond the animals, and beyond the figures in the shadows. Daniel took one last look at the shack behind him. There was no sense of triumph, no feeling of satisfaction, only the heavy burden of truth. He had uncovered a dark secret, but it wasn't over, not by a long shot. He knew now that this was just the beginning of something far larger, something he wasn't sure he could stop. But as he walked away, one thought burned through his mind, one thought that he couldn't shake. What happens to the ones that choose to run? The town would never be the same again. Neither would Daniel. He had seen the ugly truth, and there was no going back. Whatever darkness had taken root here, whatever forces had been set in motion, he could no longer ignore it. The mystery would continue to haunt him, a reminder that sometimes the things that go bump in the night aren't just figments of imagination. They are real, and they are waiting, just beyond the shadows. The weight of everything Daniel had uncovered pressed down on him like an anchor, threatening to pull him under. The morning sun seemed almost mocking, casting a golden glow over a town that no longer felt safe. A town that, for all its picturesque streets and peaceful facade, hid something twisted beneath the surface. A truth that not only affected the animals, but had also tainted the lives of the unsuspecting people who lived there. As he walked away from the shack, the sound of his footsteps echoed in the emptiness. Every step felt like a drumbeat, a reminder that the world had shifted around him. Daniel had spent his career chasing criminals, solving mysteries, and bringing justice to those who needed it. But this was different. There were no easy answers, no straightforward case to file away, and the guilt that gnawed at him was a constant companion, making him question whether his pursuit of the truth was worth the cost. His phone buzzed in his pocket, pulling him from his thoughts. It was a text from his partner, Officer Collins. "You okay?" it read, followed by a second message. "We need you back. There's been an incident. Something's not right." Daniel's thumb hovered over the screen, but the words didn't seem to matter anymore. Everything was spiraling, and he knew that no matter how much he tried to fix it, the damage had already been done. The unraveling of this case had triggered something much bigger, something he was now powerless to stop. The warning etched into that collar, that one single word, run. It had been more than just a plea. It had been a prophecy, a premonition of the chaos to come. The wind picked up, rustling the leaves in the trees. He glanced around, half expecting to see something lurking in the shadows, but it was just the ordinary hum of suburban life, the sound of distant lawnmowers, the hum of car engines, children laughing in the distance. It was all so normal, and yet it wasn't. Not anymore. As Daniel continued walking, his mind replayed the images of the shack, the rows of collars, the words scratched into each tag, the faces of the animals who had somehow known more than they let on. They had been part of something larger, something far more sinister than he could ever have imagined. And just when he thought he understood it all, the pieces of the puzzle slipped from his grasp once again. The figure that had called itself the Savior. What had it meant? Was there really some underground network operating in the shadows, orchestrating this twisted game with the lives of animals as mere pawns? And who was behind it? Was it possible that someone in the town, someone he had trusted, was pulling the strings, manipulating the system for their own dark purposes? The sun climbed higher in the sky, casting a harsh light on the town, but it did nothing to dispel the gnawing darkness that had settled in Daniel's heart. The questions were endless, spinning like a tornado inside his mind. Every answer seemed to raise more questions, and every step he took only seemed to plunge him deeper into the mystery. His thoughts were interrupted by the faint sound of a car engine. He turned to see a police cruiser slowly approaching, its lights flashing ominously in the quiet morning. It was Collins, pulling up beside him, but there was something in the air, something that made the hairs on the back of Daniel's neck stand up. "Daniel," Collins said, his voice tight with something that felt like fear. "You need to come with me. There's more. We've got a lead on where this is going." Daniel's heart raced. He had already uncovered so much, but it felt like the tip of the iceberg. What could possibly be worse than what he had already seen? He took one last look at the peaceful neighborhood, the streets that had once felt like home, and then he climbed into the cruiser. The drive to the station was tense, the silence between them thick with unspoken words. When they arrived, Daniel was led into the conference room, where a stack of files sat waiting on the table. Collins handed him a folder, his face grim. "This came in last night," Collins explained. "We've got some names, and it looks like this doesn't just stop here. This is a network. It's bigger than we thought." Daniel flipped open the folder, his eyes scanning the first page. As the details unfolded, his stomach sank. The names, the addresses, the connections, they painted a picture of a much larger operation, an operation that stretched beyond this town, beyond even the state. This was bigger than animal cruelty. It was about control. It was about power. And Daniel had stumbled right into its web. The figures in the shadows, the ones who had been watching the animals run for their lives. Had they been orchestrating this for years? The town was just the beginning. What if this was only the first chapter in a much darker story that no one had dared to tell? And the word run? That was the first warning, the first clue in a much larger puzzle. Daniel slammed the folder shut, the weight of the truth pressing down on him. This wasn't over, not by a long shot. The answers he had found had only led him to more questions, more mysteries to unravel. And even though the case seemed like it was spiraling out of control, he knew one thing for certain. He couldn't stop now. Not after everything he had seen. Not after everything he had learned. He looked up at Collins, determination in his eyes. "Let's go," he said, his voice steady but tinged with urgency. "We've got work to do." As they left the station, the sense of foreboding settled deeper into Daniel's chest. the mystery wasn't over. It was just beginning, and there were still so many more shadows to uncover. As the police cruiser sped into the unknown, Daniel couldn't shake the thought that had been haunting him ever since that first moment with the puppy. Run. The word lingered in his mind, and he realized that it wasn't just the animals who had been running. It was him too, running toward the truth, and whatever lay ahead, he had no choice but to keep running, because the real chase was only just beginning. Subscribe for more real animal stories that hit you right in the heart.